Thank you and welcome. It is Tuesday, December 5th, 2023, and you are at a Wausau Waterworks Commission meeting. Welcome, everyone. Before I get started, I want to let you know that we're removing item number 7, and I know this body is excited to talk through what that looks like, but the good news is we're removing it because we have an RP out, so more on that in the future. Yeah. All right. So the first item on our, I'll go ahead and let, sorry, I started before you were ready. Okay. All right. First item on our agenda is to approve the minutes of the November 7th, 2023 meeting. I would entertain that motion. I have a motion by Alder Herbst and a second by Commissioner Jean. Is there any discussion? Mr. Force.
I had a question, Mayor. At the tail end of our meeting, I might be at the tail end of the minutes. Yeah, we talked about public engagement on this LSR ordinance,
Yes.
and I don't know that anything has taken place yet. If it has, I'd like to know what we're doing on that.
Okay. I'll let you start.
So right now, the contract with CIP, Community Infrastructure Partners, is going to council for final approval this month. And so there's been a lot of, has drafted a lot of the community outreach. And once that contract is signed, that information will start going out in December to the residents. The public outreach that's happening right now is basically door to door with verifying inventory. Communicating with homeowners directly, knocking on doors, and getting people signed up for the 2024 construction season.
And who's doing the door knocking?
CIP is doing the door knocking, yes.
And I can also share with you that they're working with the H2N network to make sure that we're speaking in the language that folks speak, in addition to Medical College of Wisconsin and some other folks who are helping us make sure we're hitting the right people and saying the right things.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. I think this is a critical piece of what we're trying to do with lead service lines. And I guess I'd like more of a detailed report at this meeting about these developments.
So, okay, I can do that, Jim. You know, as we move forward on a month-to-month basis, what we reached out to, the number of people, we're tracking all of that information.
Yeah,
So,
I'd like to see.
okay.
I'd like to see a thorough report on that, Eric, at the January meeting. if we can.
Understand, yeah,
Thanks.
okay.
Any other discussion on the minutes? Alrighty, all of those in favor of approving the minutes of the November 7th, 2023 meeting can signify by saying aye. Any opposed? All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, item number 2, Director's Report on Utility Operations. I will pass this over to you, Director Levy.
Thanks, Mayor. Number of things on wastewater and updates. I guess one thing is that, you know, the dryer now has met Class A biosolids requirements, so we are producing Class A, which is great news. Then if any commissioners have questions on that or any others, Ben and I will attempt to answer.
Mr. Force.
I'm glad to hear that on the dryer. What's the mechanical shape of the dryer? I know there were some issues, some operational issues.
There's still some issues that exist, but our team of operators and our supervisor, Brad Whalen, has been a key player in keeping the dryer running while we're waiting for like a new gearbox to arrive. He's manipulated to keep the dryer running, so kudos to him, good job. Waiting on some leaky seals and that replacement by the contractors, so in due time it will be replaced. But it's still functional and operating.
Any other questions, clarification needed? Anything you want to specifically point out? Oh, Mr. Force has something to say.
Yeah, the Water Division report, the final sentence in that statement on that day, meaning May 10th next year, 2024, our most senior maintenance tech will have 1 year and 27 days of experience. Obviously, that's of concern to Scott, or it wouldn't be in here. Is there anything that we can do to increase the level of experience of people at that facility? Are we looking to hire someone with more experience? Is there any kind of training or whatever that can take place? That seems to be a concerning statement, and maybe I'm overreacting.
You're not. I mean, we do have concerns about the level of skills, and, we just haven't had a lot of retention at the water treatment facility or on the wastewater side. So we've had quite a turnover. Tim is leaving. He's our most experienced operator there, and I think Scott wants, and I do too, want, the commission to understand that, Tim will be there for the next few months and helping out with, the operation of the plants and trying to train and stuff, but he is just one individual, and there's a lot going on. So, and we are short-staffed, and we are looking at job descriptions to try to hire more skilled people, but we're not that hopeful if we add in a lot of additional skills just with what we're paying. So we're going to try to balance that as we begin advertising to replace these positions.
If there's some optimism, I know that with the lab tech, we already have almost a dozen people who've applied.
That's awesome.
And many have bachelor's degrees and some experience. So I think, sometimes it's different season, so we might be in for some good folks here. Mr. Jean.
I was thinking that was Kevin. Did Kevin retire, the mechanic?
Yes, yep,
He retired earlier this year.
correct, yes.
Well, that's another hole.
Right, yep. So that left a hole, and now Tim is leaving too, so, yep.
All right. Any further comment, discussion? All right, let's move on to item number 3. Discussion on the Water Savvy campaign and water conservation for customer outreach. I think this was a request from a commissioner, maybe. I see Mr. Force reaching for his mic.
Yeah, I requested that this be on the agenda. If you'll recall, probably 2 years, maybe more, ago, Scott and I and another commissioner at the time, Steve, I think, came up with this Water Savvy idea, and we actually employed a local advertising specialist to help us develop that campaign. And we're fairly aggressive in marketing it. With the rate increase, I'm wondering if we have kind of let this fall aside, and perhaps we should rethink the Water Savvy campaign idea. Number one, it may be something that's past its time, and if that's so, then we should just let it go. But if we think it still has value, particularly for those who may be struggling to pay their water rates, then I think we need to take a closer look at it and rejuvenate it. There are several ways that we could do that. We haven't been doing much with it lately, and I'm just concerned that the 2 questions I have. Number one, is it worth continuing? The second question is, if so, what should we try to do that might be new or might reinforce what we were doing in the past? So that's why I asked for the discussion.
Yeah. Alder Herbst.
Thank you, Mayor. I pulled out the Water Savvy, the original that came out. Perhaps this is something that could go in their water bills quarterly. I don't know if that's what we did the first time, but I have mine. I carry it all the time with me in my portfolio here, but that might be a thing to do, put them in all the water bills. That's a possibility. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah. What else? Mr. Robinson?
It doesn't necessarily relate to that, but in the past, we've talked about a number of things, including looking at means testing in part of our projects, and then also looking at going from quarterly to a different frequency of bills. I think all of those things, given, I've heard a lot of feedback and concerns where people were surprised at their bills, and people that put in new lawns found that it was more expensive than they thought. But so after the initial shock, you might get some changes. But I think that there are a number of other elements to this and the overall issue of affordability that we might want to look at. I think decreasing utilization is very important because that really does reduce the cost. But are there some other things that we should, in the context of this discussion, be looking at and evaluating?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Mr. Force.
And I think John's right. I would also, seeing it as December, so we are ahead of the game in terms of our rain barrel program. I know that we didn't do it last year. We did the year prior, and I think we had 70-some customers participate. In view of the fact that water usage always goes up in the summer when irrigation is occurring, it would be worth our while to look again at the rain barrel program, and whether we should reinstitute it. I'm for it. I think it worked really well, and I would advocate we do it again.
Do you think maybe we have a work group that we could put together to brainstorm some concepts? Okay. Maybe if there are folks that are interested in being part of that, Mr. Force, whoever else, we can send out an email reminder to and have folks. Anyone else with comments? Yes, Alder Herbst.
I believe at one point we discussed perhaps a monthly bill or a plan where the people could pay monthly rather than at one shot. And I looked at my water bill, I got it on Monday, and of course it was, sticker shock. But then I divided it by 3 months. And boy, when I divide it by 3 months, it's workable. And maybe it's something we need to do. I know we talked about perhaps having them pay monthly or whatever best would fit their budget.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's a great discussion that we should continue having.
Maybe, we should maybe communicate that, because people can pay monthly. They just need to choose to do that at this point because we only bill quarterly though. And so I know I pay monthly. And so maybe that's just something that we need to communicate better to the public.
Mr. Force.
I'm sorry, John. It seems to me that water bill that comes quarterly is pretty cut and dried. I mean, it hasn't changed in my mailbox for years. And so some of the things that we're talking about today, I'm wondering, can we change the way the bill looks and what is communicated in that bill? Or are we stuck with what we have?
No, I think that we have flexibility in what we can do. So I think it would just, need to understand what we want to communicate. And I think we could work on making some changes to that. Yeah.
Mr. Robinson, did you have something? Oh. Anyone else? Okay, maybe we'll get our work group back together and start brainstorming the kinds of things we'd like to talk about. Okay, next up is item number 4, discussion on the disposition of the old water treatment plant.
So this came up at the end too. I think Jim had asked about this, and so I put it on as a discussion item today. Right now, there is no plan for the disposition of it. The meter shop that's down there, we've had some interest through economic development to utilize that building. I think they were going to do some kayak business type, but for the water treatment plant itself is, there's a larger picture of the whole north riverfront there, but nothing specific on that property at this time. Yeah.
Mr. Robinson.
So who owns the building? Is it the commission, the city?
It's always seems to be a question, right? Like I think every property in the city is owned by the city because they approve it, so I would.
I see nodding from the attorney,
Yeah.
so.
So the county right now is going through a process of trying to identify its surplus property, and it's kind of looking at it from they're in a little bit different situation because they got remnant parcels that are just lost in surveys. Then they've got the tax delinquent properties, and then the properties that aren't being used, and they're trying to establish criteria. It might be worthwhile for the city to look at, if they're looking forward to developing that area, how this might fit in. And, I think this commission could go on record as saying that if it doesn't have a value to the commission or the utilities, that we would support efforts to redevelop it?
Yeah. Since we just have this on here for discussion right now, we would be able to do that at a future meeting. Absolutely, if that's what you'd like to do. We could also work with our economic development team, maybe
Yep.
to get a little bit more info and see where their minds are at. Yeah, Mr. Force.
In view of the recent pilot discussion on taxation of utility properties, I assume that we're paying taxes on that property. I don't know what it's valued at.
You know, right now, the city council approved the pilot to remain the same, to basically 1.59 million in total, yes, yep. But but the PSC, when they evaluated, they didn't put a value on that property, only the new water treatment facility, yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Jean.
Does the city own Wausau Chemicals property, the old property north of the plant?
That's, yes. What else? So if this body is interested in weighing in formally, we can get something together and talk and vote on that next month. Okay, sounds good. Alrighty, item number 5, discussion on staffing demands for upcoming locates beginning in 2024 for the installation of citywide fiber optic cable by multiple providers.
Yeah, so we had this discussion, I guess maybe last spring or, a few months ago on when TDS came into the city and the level of effort that the utility had to put forth to do locates. This year, we just sat down with Frontier. They're doing the same thing. Bug Tussle is also coming in to put in fiber in a large portion of the city. And we also have Charter this year continuing to put in. So, when we look at the level of effort for doing locates, when a construction company calls in a locate, we have 3 days, we're mandated within 3 days to make that locate. If they don't get to that area and they call in a relocate, then we only have 24 hours. And so when TDS was in, basically on the water and wastewater side, there were weeks where we had one individual on each side. That's all they were doing were locates. And so from the start of the day to the end and even on overtime. And this year, I think it's going to be the same, if not more. We looked at, hiring USIC under contract. Scott had got some pricing on that. For both water and sewer, it was about a little over $100K a year. And so at $100,000, I'm not sure if that's something that we want to consider looking at with, there's only a couple in the area. But what USIC also had told us is that they're strained as well, right? I'm in with staffing and otherwise, so it's just a matter of whether that they would be willing to take on that contract or not. But knowing that we're likely over, when construction season starts, that we're going to have, we could have more than one full-time individual on each side just doing locates, depending on what's coming in. We're doing our best to control that with the permits that we issue, making sure that permits are closed before we issue other ones, like in engineering. We have tried to reduce the size or the areas of the permits so that they're required to do more, but it's a balance of administering the number of permits, so permits, it just so the commission knows, permits, once they're issued, they're good for 30 days. And so if that contractor doesn't finish the work in 30 days, they're required to request a reissuance of that permit. And then we look at it again, and then they get another 30 days. And all of that's done up in engineering. And we keep the utility informed of where the permits are and what's happening. But obviously, when the locates come in, all of those get directed to water and sewer, when they come in.
Mr. Robinson.
So do we charge a second time when they go beyond the
Yes,
initial?
every permit gets charged, yep.
So I know Frontier's looking at the city, they're also committed to do about 10,600 sites in the county, and the only company that's been good about meeting expectations in the rural part has been Spectrum or Charter.
Okay.
I think we need to manage it and make sure that we're not creating double work for us, and pricing it accordingly. And it may be worthwhile to do, I don't know if you sit down with the IS, internet service providers, or their contractors. The problem is that they're bringing in contractors from all over,
Correct.
and you don't know who you're working with. And there have been a number of horror stories relative to some of the locates or lack thereof.
Yeah, we sat down with Frontier. They said that they were going to bring in 6 to 7 crews, right? And we just said that, that I don't know that we would be able to keep up with 6 or 7 different construction areas, right? So it's something that we're working through with them at this point, but it's a strain on the utility, it's a strain on the staff, and if the locates are, obviously by law, we have to get them done. So if they're not done during the regular workday, we just have to keep staff on until those locates get done when they're supposed to be done. So, yeah. And it's a lot of communication with the contractors on site. It's a lot of, yes, so, yeah.
Mr. Jean?
We can't charge for the locates either, right? It's
We can't, just through the permits.
just the permits.
Yeah.
Maybe they'd like to dig when we're remediating lead service lines at the
Right.
same time.
Yeah.
What else?
So I don't know if we reach out to contract this out again and bring something back in January. I bring this up because I want the commission to be aware that, I have concerns about trying to keep up with what's happening and what's going to be put in the ground this year over the next couple of years. And I know that we've talked about, adding staff and things like that. And, and we'd anticipate doing that based on that Baker-Tilly study. And we do have some meetings coming up to have further discussions on that. But I don't know what exactly is going to be in place by the time all of this really starts to roll out. And, and so, and then is that something that the commission would consider? It's a pretty much a heavy price tag, to bring somebody in and under contract to do that work for us. But, we'd have to get them inputted into our GIS system. We'd have to get, there's a lot that would have to go into that administratively, so.
Mr. Force?
Eric, do we recover costs 100% on this, or?
No, not
Not
even
even
close,
close.
no.
Mr.
We charge,
Robinson?
I think, $60 for each permit, yeah.
Is that something we should change?
We could, we did the fee schedule already, we could look at changing that fee and then, but like that, it's more of an excavation permit, so I think we would have to try to maybe possibly separate that out. We wouldn't, if somebody wants to redo their driveway, we wouldn't want to stick them with a larger cost permit, right? Like a residential, individual or whatever, so, and I don't really know what the balance would be on that, Jim, I haven't really looked into that. I'm certainly willing to have the conversation if you'd like an update on that.
There must be other municipalities that go through this, right? I wonder if there's a way to.
There are other ones that we've talked with. A lot of them are our size or maybe a little bit bigger, even maybe a little bit smaller, have more staff. Some of them on the smaller side contracted out, so, but they also have a lot less lines, on the smaller utilities, so.
Mr. Robinson?
Do we get as-built on where they're laying that when they're done? Do we have a requirement for them to provide us with those?
They provide us basically drawings. They don't do like as-built like we do with GIS surveys and things like that. No, they don't. But we also don't have all of that information in our GIS system. We don't keep all of that outside entity information. So, yeah.
Well, the county has a utility accommodation policy, and some of that, when they're starting to rip up roads, if they, and I think on occasion they do, there are different fees based upon the age of the road. Maybe I'll try to get Jim Griesbach to send that to you.
Yeah, that's fine. Alan, our city engineer, and I have talked about that as well. We've looked at some other cities that have that, Yeah, but I think that would be helpful. I'd appreciate that, John.
All right, are we ready to move on? Anyone? All right, moving on to item number 6. This is discussion on testing and monitoring wastewater for PFAS. Do you want to hit it, Ben or Eric?
Go ahead, Ben. I'll let you.
So we have the results for our first round of testing on the influent to the treatment facility, the effluent to the treatment facility, and the biosolids. And the testing was performed on October 24th, 2023. The influent results, the P4 was 4.68 nanograms per liter, and the PFOS is 6.3 nanograms per liter. The effluent results on the P4 was 5.86 nanograms per liter, and the PFOS is 7.81. We're below that 8 parts per trillion, or the nanograms per liter. Right, currently, we do have testing, we have a second round of testing going out, sent out last Thursday, I believe. On the biosolids end of it, the DNR calculates it a little bit differently. They add the P4 and the PFOS, PFOS, if you will, the two values to come up with a micrograms per kilogram. They're looking at 50 micrograms per kilogram as a guidance right now, a set value, if you will. We're at 7.804 micrograms per kilogram, and there was a value of 16 micrograms per kilogram. Yeah, that if you're below that, there's no worries. You don't have to take action. So right now we're sitting very well with our biosolids. We'll receive our results in a few weeks on the second round of testing, and those will be available once we receive them.
Questions, comments? Mr. Jean?
Ben and I talked a little bit before the meeting, but I think the wastewater plant is seeing the value of our removal at the
Yep.
drinking water side. So, I mean, it saves money on one utility, but otherwise we'd be working on both fronts.
Yes.
This doesn't quite relate to this, but I find it, and I keep going back to well 3, I find it hard to believe we should pump the water out of the ground and put that in our drinking water with PFAS in it. It just doesn't make sense. Why would you want to expose our residents to that level? I don't know what level it is, but that adds to our effort to remove it.
Correct. Yeah.
So I think we still should visit with. And it wasn't part of the consent decree originally.
No, we are still having conversations with GHD on their monthly or quarterly calls that they have with the EPA that continually becomes brought up. There just hasn't been a final decision with them yet. And I think after the first of the year, we should be having another conversation with GHD before they have their next call. So the city, our environmental engineer, Kevin, as well, we're pushing as hard as we feel we can at this point, because what our goal was before really everything kind of was to take that well offline, continue to pump it as part of the Superfund site. And we had designed a discharge area, right, that would create turbulence, and take care of any VOCs and stuff. So we have that all designed, everything ready to go. We just haven't got the authorization yet to put that in place. And that the other thing that we're trying to drive home with them is that, we have been doing minimal maintenance on that well pump house area. We've been maintaining the well and the pumps, but just because it was anticipated to take offline, and and at some point and we're going to have another sanitary survey, and I'm sure it's going to come up again from the DNR that, we should be making improvements to that well if it's going to stay online, right? And it's going to be expensive. So that's kind of where we're at. It's more of really trying to get somebody to make a decision on what we can do, so. Yeah.
I guess an update from my end of things, since we've been going through all of our water issues here, EPA seems to be listening, and they asked me to join their local government advisory committee and co-chair their local government policy. So I think we're going to have a good seat at the table to continue these discussions, and also getting connected to the right people that can help us make the best decisions for our community instead of these kind of weird concessions we're being asked to do. Mr. Robinson.
So a couple of things. First of all, from the influent, do we do any point source or monitoring within the system? You had referenced the threshold of 8, which is the surface water standard as part of the WPDS renewal process, and because we're the drinking water, potential use as a drinking water supply. But we're close. And one of the ways you can reduce that is to work with the industries to see if we can connect it to a certain industry to look for them to change and modify their behavior. So we're not dealing with it as an influent or an effluent and as a biosolid. So I would hope we would give some thought to how we might approach that, and whether there are, given, we've got PFOA and PFAS, and we've got a number of other of the compounds that are present in the system. We would want to look at it. And I think there's also been recent legislation introduced relative to requiring sampling of biosolids, and I think we have to be aware of it. But nobody seems to, on the state or the federal level, really want to jump onto the biosolids regulation bandwagon. You've got
Correct.
Maine and Michigan sort of taking somewhat of a leadership position, but my fear is that all of a sudden it'll sneak up on us, and you're also getting some kickback from farm groups and others who are concerned about the land spreading. So I think it's good that we're doing this, and I applaud staff for being ahead of the curve on it. But I think we have to keep our eyes wide open and look at it and begin to go upstream, not just at the plant, and see what modifications we might be able to work with industry on if it's an industrial source.
Correct.
I think one of the things that we had talked about, and Ben and I met with Schofield, Mark, down in Schofield, and talked about, so there is going to be some sampling down there, and some of the more industrial. We had also talked about in the city here, if we should pull some samples from certain areas of the city initially, whether it's from lift stations, to try to see if there's higher concentrations, elsewhere. And then then we can focus on those areas where potential industries are, or rather than just kind of sitting citywide at this point. So I think that we have had those conversations, John. We haven't acted on those yet. But I think as we move forward over the next couple of months, we should have some additional information on how that progresses. So, yeah.
Mr. Force.
In reference to Joe's comment on well number 3, what percentage of our drinking water is coming from well number 3?
It's one of our higher producers. I think we're pumping, Scott has all these numbers in his head, but I thought we were pumping like 1,000 to 1,200 gallons a minute out of that well when it's running.
And what would that be percentage-wise versus the others? 10%, 20%?
No, it's a good percentage. Well 3 and well 6, they don't run at the same time, and then
Okay.
typically we have 2 wells running, so.
So it's not a small stream?
No, it's not a small stream. Yeah.
I think well 3 runs on the weekend and 6 during the week.
Okay.
But I don't,
All right.
that Scott would have to confirm.
But yeah, it's not like just 10% or something, Jim. It's,
Okay.
yeah.
So shutting it down would have an impact?
It does, yeah, and then we just run our other well. I mean, we have the capacity, right? The
Okay.
reason we run well 3 and well 6 is because we're required to do, because of the consent decree. So You know, but we could run our other ones that, yeah. We
Okay.
have plenty of capacity.
Then I had another question on John's comment about source brought to mind. There were some news reports recently about the quarry, the 3M quarry on the northeast side, and drinking water samples that were taken there. I wasn't clear on the whole methodology. Is that of any concern to us? Is that on our radar screen at all?
Oh, it's definitely on our radar screen. So it's the corporation's drinking water facility, and they were
Yes.
finally required to test. And that's when they discovered the 520 parts per trillion of those two compounds. So I think it is reason to be concerned, but we're not sure yet how concerned.
So when you look at our well field, right, it's, you know, a lot of our wells are on the west side, up on the north. That's basically where this is, so,
Northwest, I meant.
yeah, yeah. So we're down gradient from that, so there is, you know, so that it definitely is on our radar.
So if you're using the water to spray to keep down dust or something, it might be going into the environment, runoff of all kinds. People. Mr. Robinson.
Well, I think that there are broader concerns to this if, depending upon what the source is, it's obviously not a naturally occurring, so it's not the source in the quarry. It is, what are they taking back to the quarry from their crushing facility, and what is that coated with? And I think that has ramifications throughout the city, given the prevalence of 3M material over the years being used as fill material. I think there are some very significant potential ramifications to this issue, not only in the Village of Maine, but also potentially as a source in Wausau.
Regionally.
Yeah.
Mr. Jean.
We're assuming that their dust that they take back may contain PFAS. We don't know that for a fact. I thought it was the wells that they're pumping the water to.
Yep, that's where the testing came from.
And when I first started with the city, there was, my understanding, I never saw it in print, but Wausau Papers pumped some of their mill waste into the ground, and then they discovered, and it was a lot of sulfide, and the concern was that was going to migrate to our wells for the city of Wausau. And we've never detected that, but they did put a barrier well. It was in operation years and years ago. So I don't know if there's a relationship there either, so.
Interesting.
Anyone else? Okay, so I guess we will continue having this discussion as we, did you have something then?
To your point, John, as far as source reduction, we do plan on sending out through the pretreatment program, through the coordinator, letters to the industrials, the users, that give them a chance to see what they're using and see if it is PFAS-free, to eliminate some of that and have some source reduction prior to any testing. So we will be doing that hopefully soon.
Okay. I'm not seeing anyone else who would like to discuss this item. So as I discussed before, we're going to talk about item 7 next month, hopefully. Last up on our agenda is a motion to adjourn. I have a motion by Alder Herbst and a second by Commissioner Jean. All in favor can signify by saying aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you.